back to the channel, and today a quick discussion that I have labelled Just Getting Through a Book. And I was watching Benjamin McAvoy's channel at the Hardcore Reading Club, a Hardcore Literature Reading Club I believe, and he was talking about 1-star reviews for some of his favourite books and some of his thoughts about how some people maybe potentially read too fast, maybe don't give a book time to breathe, and maybe end up DNFing a book or hating a book that they might otherwise have enjoyed. And his main points were these. Firstly, if you're struggling with a book in that sense, he says put the book down and return to it in 2 to 3 years. It could be a case of you just needing to be in a different place in your life, maybe having new life experiences, and that certainly will work with certain classic authors, ones that are really reflective in their style. And I think the second point he was really making is adapt your reading speed to the author. So if you're finding a work particularly dense, or you are struggling to keep up with the amount of characters and maybe the depth of subtext that is involved, to potentially reread chapters after you've read them and make notes on characters, plot points and themes. And it's a really interesting idea because obviously when you study books at university, for instance, it is something you're going to be used to doing. It's something that you'll be encouraged to do, and it is certainly something that has worked for Ben. And I thought they were really, really interesting points. And I thought I would look at the way I treat these kinds of books and really think about what works for me and kind of discuss it on this video about the idea of just getting through a book. Now, if you've got a goal, if you are very goals driven, maybe you have page counts per day that you like to do, or the number of books you want to read in a month or year, it's going to be very, very tempting to steamroller through books, to kind of scan read a lot of the time, to plow through books, and if you are not enjoying a book, DNF often and early. There's nothing to say that that's a bad thing to do at all. It certainly keeps things snappy, it keeps things fun, it kind of means that you avoid any potential downtime. If your time is very limited, obviously it's going to be very, very potentially rewarding in the long term, and certainly will help you hit those goals. If you are someone, and I remember seeing this on Michael K. Vaughan's channel, certainly it is very similar for myself, I don't like being defeated by anything. If I'm struggling with a book, I often think, the first thing I think is I slow down my reading and think, why am I struggling with this? Sometimes I do reread paragraphs, rarely a whole chapter. Often I will change my reading speed based on the prose style. Sometimes I like to warm up into a particular author's style. So for instance, the Victorian style, I find if you can kind of have 2 or 3 Victorian novels read back to back, you really warm up to that kind of style, especially the dialogue and the references, and the whole reading experience tends to flow a little bit better for me personally. Certainly if a text is very dense, I remember reading Homer and Dostoevsky, and I found both of those really, it really helped to slow down my reading speed. I'm quite a slow reader anyway. I love to sub-vocalize. I love to imagine absolutely every detail that is described to me and try to build a picture in my mind. But I like to take extra time around dense texts and dense books. I think one important point is really not to get discouraged if early on a book isn't working for you. If you like to DNF early and often, you're probably not going to have come across this very often. But what I have found is a lot of books are similar to the game of football, can be books of 2 halves, or even, as most are, books of 3 acts. And often the pacing, the plotting, the character work are vastly different depending on which part of the book you're in. Books that are very much books of 2 halves for me would be Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet, where the narrative style changes literally at the halfway point, or maybe War and Peace, where the book becomes more of a kind of existential experience, or maybe a personal experience with the author in the second half, rather than more a one-to-one relationship with the characters in the first half of the novel. Or longer books like Lord of the Rings, which are clearly in 3 acts, or were written as 3 books in that case, and where the pacing and the plotting are vastly different from one book to the next. Obviously, Fellowship was very much slower. In The Two Towers, there were some very important themes to Tolkien he wanted to get across, and then the third part, the third act was very much there was a lot more action, a lot more character work, and it was much more emotionally resonant. So sometimes, just because the first half of a book isn't working for you, if you DNF it, you may not get to experience what everyone loves about it, because a lot of people might have had a very similar experience in the first act or the first half of the book as you were, but by persevering, they've actually managed to glean all of that goodness that otherwise you wouldn't have seen. I personally, I'm not a big DNFer, and I have found a few books that I would have loved to have DNF'd have actually redeemed themselves, but I do understand half the time that is not the case. Half the time the gut instinct is very much real. And I remember the 2 reads from last year where I thought, should I DNF this? And I probably should have. But I also will point to the books that I didn't DNF and that redeem themselves wholeheartedly. And that kind of has kept my faith with that style. I'd really love to know what you guys think. I would love to see a response video if someone has different feelings than myself. And definitely I would recommend going and checking out Ben's video as well.